Welcome to Performance Perspectives, Performance Development Group's podcast for commercial leaders in life sciences. Each episode features industry experts tackling the sector's biggest challenges, offering actionable insights to drive performance and boost marketplace impact.
Today, we're taking a look at the Inflation Reduction Act, an event that is poised to reshape the landscape of Medicare drug pricing and trigger a cascade of massive changes across the entire pharmaceutical market in the United States. To help us unpack this topic is Chuck Collins, a true authority on managed markets and healthcare policy. Chuck's been guiding organizations through the maze of healthcare legislation for over 30 years. Chuck, before we dive in, would you mind sharing with our audience a bit more about your background and experience in this domain?
Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here. Chuck Collins, President, Healthcare Stakeholder Solutions. We are a market access consultancy focused on the healthcare disparities in our country. And by way of introduction, have over 20 some odd years in the pharma industry itself, between two manufacturers, as well as been in the industry for over 35 years.
Chuck, that's great, and we're so happy to have you here today. Before we kind of dig into this, I was hoping that you might be able to provide us a high-level overview of what the Inflation Reduction Act is and its primary goals.
The Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the IRA, has the potential to be transformative not only for Medicare beneficiaries in Part D plans, but also the federal government, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and other stakeholders. So, signed into law in August of 2022, the IRA directs federal spending towards four major areas: reducing carbon emissions, lowering healthcare costs, which is going to be the focus of our discussion today, funding the Internal Revenue Service, and improving taxpayer compliance. So the overarching goal of the IRA when it comes to healthcare is really to lower prescription drug costs, not only for the Medicare beneficiary, but also the drug spending for the federal government. And there's four key areas that are going to take place fairly quick to make this happen. First is limiting the monthly cost sharing for insulin to $35 for Medicare beneficiaries. That started in 2023. Also in 2023, the IRA requires drug manufacturer companies to pay rebates back to Medicare if the prices rise faster than inflation for the drugs that are used by Medicare beneficiaries. And then in 2025, there was also a cap on patient out-of-pocket costs. And also in 2025, a major Part D redesign that was going to take place. And then lastly, this has already started, but it's actually going to impact in 2026, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act requires the federal government to negotiate prices for the very first time for drugs that are covered under Medicare Part D with the highest total spending.
Thanks for that overview. I mean, it sounds like pretty comprehensive legislation. I'm curious, Chuck, what are some of the potential challenges that pharmaceutical companies might face as they adapt to the new landscape created by the IRA?
So I think some of the challenges that are going to happen as we get into some of the impact of the IRA is you're going to start seeing, I think, resetting of forecast. I think all pharmaceutical manufacturers that have especially Part D drugs are definitely going to be looking at their forecasts and really looking at what that impact's going to be as we go into the future. I think also what you're going to see is a redistribution of funding, quite honestly, because there's only so much to work with. And I think with the complications and the impact of the IRA, you're definitely going to see that. And then also, I think broad stroke, what we have to keep in mind strategically is when you look at what's happening in the Medicare landscape and all that's taking place with the IRA, it'll eventually creep its way over into the commercial side. So whatever the pricing and that we're going to be seeing on the Medicare side, you're going to definitely see it on the commercial side.
I want to dig down just a little bit and say, given what we know about the IRA, are there some immediate steps that commercial leaders in pharma should be considering right now?
Yeah, so I think the obvious one in this, and I've seen this experience across multiple companies, and it really depends on to what level they want to go into, but I really think the commercial leaders should be educating and training their teams as well as their customers, right, on all the aspects of the IRA and the impact of the IRA and what this new landscape is going to be.
Yeah, I could see that. In fact, some of the customers and clients that we deal with at PDG, we see variations of that. I mean, they're all in kind of different spots right now. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I am. I mean, there are some organizations that just want the account teams maybe to know a little bit more about the impact of the IRA and versus the field sales teams or even their field reimbursement teams. I've seen more companies on the field reimbursement side take a more active and proactive role because they want to be seen as that partner inside their customers, whether it be into a physician's office or an account or hospital or whatever the site of care might be that they're calling on. That they want to be able to be that partner, to be able to have answers into answers to their questions of what this impact is going to be. And again, the most part of we're going to see is the impact is going to be on the Medicare Part D, benefit, if you will.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Chuck, because we're experiencing some similar things with the clients and people that we're talking to right now. I want to dig down just a little bit and think about the individual brands. How do you anticipate that the Inflation Reduction Act will affect brand strategies? And so, for example, what do you believe is going to be their biggest challenge, in your opinion?
So I think two things. One is where the brand is in the life cycle management process, right? If it's an existing brand that's out there, I think they're going to have to be looking at, how is the access landscape going to change, or even the reimbursement landscape going to change for them in this new environment. On the flip side, if you are a brand that's about to launch a product in this space, you've got a whole different view on what's taking place here. And that's a part of it is what we talked about earlier, those inflationary rebate structures that are put into place. And that's going to be a big part on pricing, right? How to price the product with a brand new drug in an environment where you're now going to be tied to inflation, and anything above inflation, you're going to be writing a check back to Medicare or CMS. So I think this can play a big part in this.
Sounds like it's going to be a challenge regardless of whether your brand is new and being launched or is existing and been around.
Well, yeah. And I think what you're going to see, though, and let's talk about somebody that's coming to market in the next year and a half or 2 years with their brand, and they're currently in phase 2 or going into phase 3 right now or part of phase 3. The issue is where your price of your drug, let's say it's a specialty drug, because that's basically, we have over 50%, market share in specialty pharmaceuticals now, and that's not going to go away. That's actually going to continue to grow as small molecule drugs are not being developed. And so these drugs are all going to come out most likely, with five-digit figures, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 a month drugs. And the issue is, let's say you would normally come out at a $15,000 a month drug for this therapeutic area, whatever it may be, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, and you're not going to have a way to recap future price increases. You're most likely going to come out with, let's say, a $20,000 drug instead of a $15,000 drug, because you don't have a way to recap any of your investment into this because you're going to be tied to inflation. And as we know, inflation is hovering in the 3.5, 3.8 range right now. Eventually, if we actually get it back down to the 2% level, you can imagine over time that you're not going to see the prices of drugs increase above that 2%. And that's going to be very hard for innovation. And as we look at research and development.
So Chuck, is what you're saying is that typically brands might have 1, 2, maybe 3 price increases over a 12-month period. Their price increases are going to be much less than traditional due to the fact that they're trying to stay under what is the current inflation rate?
Correct. And I think you've already started to see, just in general, the pharmaceutical manufacturers have actually started to lower their price increasing capabilities, if you will, over the last couple of years. Actually, price increases have not been double digit that we used to see many years ago. Now they're in the single digits, anywhere between 5 to 7%. And since this is now taking place in 2023, there were, right off the bat, the first quarter, there were Part D and Part B drugs, mostly Part B drugs, that were immediately impacted by the inflationary drug rule. And, they got invoices and they had to send a check in to take care of, their price increases. And I think it's even stated, and don't quote me on the number, but the current administration had made the comment, had they passed the Inflation Reduction Act a year earlier, I think there were 2,100 drugs that would have been impacted by the inflationary rebate. I think they sent out 2930 for the first quarter that they did this, which was at the end of 2023 going into 2024. But had they done it a year earlier and signed that into law, they said 21 to 2,200 drugs would have been impacted by the inflationary piece of this. So yeah, that just gives you an idea that this is under the radar.
That's incredible. So if you're taking price increases above the inflation rate, then you're basically going to be paying a margin call at some point, right?
Right. Why would you? It doesn't make sense. You're just writing a check back to the federal government if you do that. And so you might as well use your money somewhere else.
I think that gets to the point that you made right at the beginning, is how this is going to impact forecasting for brands moving forward as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So changing gears just a little bit, there's a lot of discussion about the $2,000 out-of-pocket cap for Medicare beneficiaries. Can you do me a favor and explain how this works and its potential impact?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here, right? As we just talked about the $2,000 cap. And basically what has happened is, I think one of my first parts of the intro to this is that I mentioned there was an out-of-pocket cap that was taking place in 2024. And basically what that means, you've got, so when you look at the Part D benefit, right, there are 4 phases. There's a deductible, an initial coverage, coverage gap phase, and a catastrophic phase. So we still have those 4 phases as we're in 2024. And in 2024, because of the IRA, basically for the beneficiary, there's no catastrophic phase anymore. So basically, once they get through the deductible in initial coverage phase and the coverage cap phase, and a certain dollar amount is hit, they're done. They no longer have to worry about that 5% responsibility in the catastrophic phase in 2024. With that said, when you do the math and all the different contributions that are involved, it's about $3,100 to $3,250 that a beneficiary right now in 2024, as we speak, would be paying out of pocket, and then everything stops. It's picked up. That 5%, by the way, that they would normally be paying goes right to the health plan. So the health plan in 2024, instead of paying 15% in catastrophic, they're now paying 20%. The government's still paying their 80%. So I'm glad you asked the question, because that's going to set us up for what the Inflation Reduction Act was all about. So yeah, as we look at 2025, there are 2 major pieces that are going to take place here. One is going to be the Part D benefit redesign, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then secondly, at the same time, we're going to have a new payment option called the Medicare Prescription Payment Plan. But let's first talk about, this cap for 2025. So I've already talked about 2024. Like I said, it's now capped around $3,150 to $3,250 for beneficiaries, depending on the mix of generic and branded drugs. But as we look at 2025, for the Medicare beneficiary, there's really only 2 phases. I just mentioned 4 that are sitting there for 2024, but in 2025, there's only an initial deductible phase, which the most that deductible can be is $590 by law. And that's only if the beneficiary has a benefit design that actually has a deductible. Some would argue, why even have a deductible? Because you're now capped at $2,000. But let's say you do have a deductible, you go into the initial coverage phase, and now the beneficiary is responsible for 25% of the retail cost of the drug, up until you hit $2,000. So we're only playing with $1,410 to work with. So you got $590 and $1,410, that gets you to $2,000. So what's really important about that $2,000 mark is that it doesn't matter if the beneficiary is on 1 drug, 3 drugs, 5 drugs, 7 drugs. It doesn't matter. The number is $2,000. Once you hit that $2,000, whether it be generic or branded, you're done as a Medicare beneficiary. So that's great news for the Medicare beneficiary. And the IRA is set up that this is all upside for the Medicare beneficiary. For the very first time, they're truly capped on their cost under this new benefit design as we go into 2025. Now, that's the first part. The second part is the Medicare Prescription Payment Plan. This is a new payment option that the government has put into place inside the IRA that basically says, let's say to the beneficiary, you may or may not have $2,000 up front to make your payments, right? And what would create that? So since I said you have to hit 25% of the retail costs, let's take an $8,000 a month drug. 8,000 times 0.25 get you to $2,000. So an $8,000 drug a month or above, you will be capped out at $2,000 immediately. So in January, you would go to the pharmacist and they would say you owe $2,000. You may say, I don't have that up front to do. So the government has put in a plan called the Medicare Prescription Plan. And basically, it allows you to take that $2,000 and spread it over time. So the key thing is time is on your place. If you do it in January, you're going to have lower monthly costs, throughout the year. If you start in September, not so much. So some things to keep in mind. It's completely voluntary, but you do have to opt into it. Right now, we're in open enrollment from October 15th through December 7th. So during open enrollment, the health plans are required by law, again through the IRA, that they have to supply an enrollment form for the Medicare Prescription Payment Plan and explain what that is and that this is a new option for you. Now, again, you don't have to do anything. You can do it proactive and get there. But in January, you may go and say, gosh, I can't afford this. And by law, the pharmacist, as well as the health plan, have to, through adjudication processes right on the screen, say, oh, you are a beneficiary that might most likely benefit from this program. So there's a brochure called the Most Likely Benefit brochure that they have to hand out. The Medicare beneficiary can go home, sign up for it, come back and pick up the drug, and then it's called smoothing. Underneath all that, you could smooth the payments out. So with the Medicare Prescription Payment Plan, there are a lot of operational issues that are taking place with this, not only on the pharmacy side, but the health plan. But the health plan has the onus of the responsibility of this entire new payment option and making sure that everything works the way it's supposed to work.
So Chuck, you mentioned that there's open enrollment that's happening from October to December 7th. What happens after December 7th? Can patients still opt in during 2025, or do they have to wait till open enrollment happens at the end of 2025?
No, a great question. So what happens, this is the major enrollment time, right, where all the new plans are coming out. If you do nothing, if you're already in Medicare, you already have a plan, you're happy, you don't have to do anything. It'll just go ahead and roll over. However, Medicare is very generous in how they do open enrollment, enrollment into Medicare in general. So typically 3 months before your 65th birthday, 3 months after your 65th birthday, you have the opportunity to sign up for Medicare. And then there's other times throughout the year as well. So I would almost say you pretty much can enroll in the Medicare anywhere along the way. There are some penalties for doing certain things if you don't enroll in a certain period of time, but you can do it all throughout the year.
I got you. So if I'm a 70-year-old, I'm not worried about my birthday because I'm already in Medicare, and I don't happen to hit open enrollment to start 2025, but I learn about it in May, let's say, I can still enroll. It's just my price per month to get through the $2,000 cap is going to be a little higher per month if they smooth it out. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, I want to keep the two separate. So there's open enrollment is for the actual benefit from Medicare, whether it be fee-for-service, which would be your original Medicare Part A and Part B, and then if you need a prescription drug plan, Part D, and or what's called Part C, or Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage typically it rolls up Part A and B, plus it also has the prescription drug plan that's sitting in there, and vision, dental, wellness, other things are in there from Medicare Part C. So Medicare Advantage kind of has that all-encompassing one-stop shopping, right? But you have some very healthy individuals that are over 65 that maybe don't need all those benefits. So that's why you have to really kind of pick and choose, and this is the time to do it. Now, what is interesting about open enrollment that you just mentioned, though, we have on average close to 58 options for seniors in every state, whether it be a standalone PDP or an MAPD, which is the Medicare Advantage, prescription drug plan, if you will. So between the two, they've got close to 58 to 60 options per state. I know the state of Pennsylvania actually has over 80. But what we do see as a trend is we're starting to see a trend going from the standalone PDPs over to Medicare Advantage. And I think that's prescription plan, which I think is important to bring up here, because I think what we're going to see, I don't have the crystal ball in front of me, but as we go into 25 and 26, with the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, we may see a continued shrinkage of the PDP plans because they're pharmacy benefit. There's nothing else around to support and help them, where on the Medicare Advantage side, you have the medical benefit, plus dental, vision, wellness, other revenue generating areas that can, keep everything afloat. So I think you're going to see a lot because this is going to impact Part D plans substantially. We didn't really get into the benefit design. I only talked about the Medicare beneficiary, but in this new benefit design for 2025, it's going to impact two stakeholders, tremendously. And that is the Part D sponsor, the plans, the health plans, as well as the pharmaceutical manufacturer. So in the initial coverage phase and the catastrophic phase, the Part D plans are going to be paying 65% and then shift over to 60% of the cost of the drug. They're going to be subsidizing this drug. Again, if you think about the IRA, the whole idea is to reduce healthcare costs, not only for the beneficiary, which they've done, capped it to $2,000, but also the federal government. Remember we were talking about the 2024 benefit design, and I said that catastrophic, that the government's paying 80% and the health plan's now paying 20%. Under the new structure, the catastrophic, phase is there for the stakeholders. But again, the health plan is going to be paying 60%, but the government is going from 80% to 20%. And who's going to pick up the other 20%? That's going to be the pharmaceutical manufacturer. And the pharmaceutical manufacturer is also paying 10% in that initial coverage phase.
So they're pushing the cost back to the insurers as well as the pharmaceutical companies now.
Yep, they've shifted the cost. And like I said, there's only so much to work with. It has to go somewhere, and we're shifting it. What's really key to think about here, too, when we look at the Medicare population, there's roughly 66 million Medicare beneficiaries in our country. 50 million out of that 66 million have this benefit designed.
Okay.
So it's going to have a huge impact on both health plans and the pharmaceutical manufacturers.
I appreciate that perspective and all that background. That's great. So we talked a little bit about potentially some of the challenges that could be faced with the IRA. Are there any potential opportunities that the Inflation Reduction Act might create for forward-thinking pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to see, and this would be very forward-thinking, is as you're going through and looking at their delivery models, right? So if you have self-administered drugs, they fall under Part D, and they are being heavily subsidized now by the pharma manufacturers where they were not before. And Part B, right, which are HCP-administered drugs in environment and sites of care, they are not being impacted anywhere near like this. So I think you might see manufacturers look at, hey, can we take our drug, right, our pharmacotherapy, and maybe get it to a HCP-administered delivery versus self-administered, so that maybe we can circumvent, some of these discounts and costs that we're now going to be incurring with 50 million people, right? So that might be one area. I think the other area, too, is the investment in rare and orphan disease drugs and therapies, because that really provides, I'm going to call, a safe haven in the midst of all of this. There are lots of exclusions because of rare diseases that, are not going to be subject to negotiated prices and, in things of that nature, or any of these discounts as well.
Our clients are often faced with, very competitive environments or therapeutic areas to compete in. How do you see the Inflation Reduction Act affecting competitive dynamics across the landscape? Is it going to level the playing field in some ways, or is it going to create a different dynamic, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think the first part of that, I would say, is it's going to level the playing field, because price is not going to be the elephant in the room anymore, if you will, because of the way things are going to be capped and have to be introduced, and it's definitely going to be under the microscope. But I think where the opportunities are going to be are really going to be in the if you will, the efficacy, the value, proposition of that brand and that therapeutic, area of, like, what unmet need are you going to bring to the table? And that's really going to be talking about what innovation are you going to bring to address that unmet need that's not being addressed now. I think what happens is you're going to get away from, if there's any Me Too type products, still being developed, those will probably go to the wayside a little bit more, and it's going to be about innovation. But as you can see, the trick here, the balancing act on innovation, is now we're capping on pricing, right? Which is one of the best pieces of getting the revenue, to do all this. That's going to be capped. So there's going to be, a little push and pull going on here.
Yeah, Jared, I'm thinking out loud here, so I hope that you can either shape my thinking or correct it if I'm sort of going in a wrong direction. But, the patient benefits the most from this. I think you would agree with me, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so they're really just looking at a $2,000 out of pocket, and I'm not minimizing the fact that $2,000 is a lot of money to these people, to anyone, quite honestly.
Anyone, really.
But if one of the challenges a lot of the branded products have out there is when there's patent expiration and now they have generic versions or biosimilars if you're in the bio space, and that's more appealing for clinicians to prescribe because it's less out-of-pocket cost for their particular patients. And so that's always a dynamic that branded products are facing. Does this sort of level that playing field? Because it seems to me like you're going to move through that $2,000 pretty quickly, regardless of whether it's a generic or a biosimilar or a branded product, especially if you're on multiple drugs or therapies. What's your thinking around that?
So as far as level playing field, so I think, from a manufacturer perspective, the beneficiary is going to go through it pretty quick. And that's what I was talking about, that 20%, cost of the drug and catastrophic. It's going to definitely hit the manufacturer, fairly hard. And I think, some of the things you're going to see is maybe there might be a change in contributions to charitable organizations. Most of the pharma manufacturers support charitable organizations that actually help with deductibles and costs of drugs for Medicare beneficiaries because they can't use a copay card. And I think we're starting to even see some of those foundation dollars, starting to be reduced because, again, they're being hit with, inflation rebate penalties, if you will. We're now doing price negotiation. The first 10 drugs were just announced that are going to take effect in January 2026. And the next 15 are going to be released in February of 2025. So we'll know what those are. And then, as we go into 26, we're going to now pick the drugs for 27 that are going to now have 2 Part B drugs on it. So eventually we're going to have Part B and Part D drugs going to be negotiated close to about 100 drugs by the time we get to 2030. So if everything stays the way they are, and I underscore if, because obviously we have a huge presidential election. People always ask me, like, what do you see happening there? And it's like, well, a bigger part is looking at the Congress side of it all, right? Like, what's going to happen with the Congress, with the House and with the Senate, because that's really where all the laws and the policies and everything are taking place and getting pushed through and created. So I think we have to kind of see, how all that's going to be. But, this is we're looking at this and we're answering questions today on what we think is going to happen given where we are right now, right? Nothing's going to change with the IRA, in January. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, Chuck, I want to ask that question just a little bit differently and get your take on it. So again, healthcare professionals are influenced by their prescribing habits when there is a generic or a biosimilar that hits the market. The plans certainly push for that because of the cost, and they tend to lean that way rather than writing branded products. However, I think if you talk to most healthcare professionals, most doctors, if they had a preference, if price was equal, they would probably rather write the branded product. So what I'm trying to get my mind around here is, if that $2,000 gets you, if you move through that pretty quickly as a patient, does that encourage healthcare professionals or doctors to maybe write more branded products than they have been over the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. I think, I don't know if it's going to encourage them to do so. I think they will use them more. And you bring up a great perspective, and I think I'm going to turn it just a little slightly in the sense that I think you're going to see more Medicare beneficiaries actually go to the doctor more in 2025 and beyond, because things and ailments or what they may think they may be suspect they have cancer or something, they haven't gone because they haven't been able to afford it, right? Now they know I'm going to be capped at $2,000. So maybe now I can, get that oncology drug because I know the most I'll ever have to pay is $2,000. And I'll figure out a way to make that happen. So I think you're going to see patient adherence go up. I think you're going to see patient, prescription abandonment go down because now this is more affordable for them. So I think you're going to see that. As far as, the prescribing habits of, HCPs, they've always had to worry about that. What's the cost to my patient? And that kind of goes away. I think that's kind of the root of where you were going with this. And, where they want to use a branded drug versus a biosimilar or generic. With that said, I think the payer side of all this is that there are a lot of mandates put into place that generics first, biosimilars first. So I think, the HCP might, get, penalized, for going outside of the formulary or the treatment algorithms that are sitting there that everything's dictated, as you look at the electronic medical records. And all you have to do is pull it up and just say, here's your suggested drugs for you to pick from. So I think you're going to see more utilization management, taking place because of, the cost of everything, especially on the Part D plans. They're going to have to start being more strict and maybe put in more prior auths, maybe an unintentional consequence of all this. But I think you're going to see stricter, utilization management. I think you're going to see narrow networks of, choices. And, I think you're going to see a lot of those things take place because now we're going into cost containment mode.
That makes perfect sense. So there's a lot of things that we do know, and there seems like there's some prognostication that's still what we don't know and what we're anticipating. Chuck, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's clear that the Inflation Reduction Act represents a significant shift in our industry. In our next segment, we'll be discussing how the IRA will impact client-facing teams in the pharmaceutical industry. And thanks again, Chuck, for sharing your expertise with us.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
For our viewers, if you found this information valuable, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to stay updated on future episodes. In the description, you'll find a link to learn more about how Performance Development Group can help your organization prepare for this and other significant industry changes.